This is The Poet and the Poem from the Library of Congress. It's a poet and poem special featuring David Lehman. And I have waited a very long time to be with David Lehman. And let's hear him with an opening poem.
I'd like to read a poem entitled May 2nd for you, Grace, because May 2nd is the day on which we recorded this delightful conversation. I like your eyeglasses, by the way. That's the first line of the poem. No, it isn't. The poem is called May 2nd, and it was written in 1996 for my wife, who was then not yet my wife. And it was chosen by Jackie Kennedy's daughter, Caroline, for a book she did. I can't remember it now. She did an anthology for her mom, and I have a signed copy from Caroline Kennedy, so she must have really liked this poem. May 2nd, Sunday, I'd like to go to Atlantic City with you, not to gamble. Just being there with you is enough of a gamble, but to ride the high white breakers, have a Manhattan, and listen to a baritone saxophone play a tune called Salsa Eyes with you beside me on a banquette. But why stop there? Let's go to Paris in November when it's raining and we read the Tribune at La Rotonde. Our hotel room has a big bathtub. I knew you'd like that. And we can be a couple of unknown Americans. What are we waiting for? Let's go.
David, you're going to make me cry before this hour's out because I really love you. You have a new book, and it's just out, Morning Lines. What is the title of that book, and what's in it?
The Morning Line is the title. I had written books called The Daily Mirror and The Evening Sun, and the Morning Line is a phrase in horse racing, and I like gambling, and I decided, I believe it was May 20th of the year of the pandemic, to write a title poem for the collection that I had, and it was a meditation on gambling, essentially, the Morning Line, and it, of course, there's a pun in the word morning, because you can mourn for someone who's deceased, or and line has multiple meanings as well. So that's how I came to write that poem. It's rather long, and so I didn't think I would read it, but it's terrific. I have to tell you that it's really one I'm proud of.
You know what? That is the only thing I don't know about you. I had no idea of your gambling. You and Bukowski. I had no idea that you had a vice. David, you're coming down off the Mount Olympus.
I have many a vice. I don't have a smartphone, but I have a lot of vices, and
Oh,
I
well, let's hear
don't.
about all of them. I'm going to go into every one of them. So in your new book, is it about gambling?
Well, the title poem, The Morning Line, is, and then there are references to horse racing in other poems, and I'm less of a gambler in the sense of placing 20 bucks on Novak Djokovic to win the Roland Garros. It's more as though I've gambled with my life, like
Oh.
Pascal's wager. Life is a gamble in many ways. And my poem, The Morning Line, really examines all the
Oh.
ways in which we gamble and gamble about God.
Oh
That's the
my
greatest
gosh,
gamble.
how fabulous a metaphor is that? You wrote in the Smithsonian Magazine interview this, and I'm going to quote you. You said, I write a lot of different styles and forms on the theory that all things sounds like me at the end. So why not make them as different from one another as possible in outward appearance on the page? Now, do you remember saying that? And did you do that?
Yes,
And do you do that?
I do. For example, I could read you a poem that consists of 6 stanzas, each one of which is a haiku. And so the haiku is a stanza. Richard Wilbur taught me that. He wrote a number of poems that way. This is called Blame Not My Lute, which I believe I lifted the title from Sir Thomas Wyatt, uh, who wrote a wonderful poem called They Flee From Me That Sometime Did Me Seek, a Renaissance poem. Anyway, blame not my lute. Blame not my lute, my youth, my dope, my flute, the fruit of the vine or womb. Blame not the basket full of first drafts, the drawer full of old folders. Blame not my lute, my pen, pencil, typewriter, my lute awake, asleep. Blame not the colors or the water, the brushes, the paper, the light. Banish all and let it be spring in the morning and autumn at night.
Not to blame is a holy thing in itself. And today we are honoring Spring and David Lehman. He is a household name for his poetry anthologies. I think everyone knows that he edited the Oxford Book of American Poetry. The best American poetry is what we know him for. There must be 38 or 40 volumes of that by now, David. And I just want everyone to know that you have written more than 15 volumes of your own poetry, maybe 20 by now, 9 books, maybe more, of nonfiction, many books of criticism, art, and history. Your work has been I'm just reminding you who you are. Your work has been translated into more than 16 languages, and your own translations have won the Emily Clark Balch Award. I'm going to get into each of these things later, but I just want to say to everyone that right now I'm willing to say David Lehman is the greatest curator of American culture in all of its forms who lives among us today. This is true. We are so lucky to be with you today. So let me have another poem.
That was an amazing compliment. And I'm so grateful to you for saying such nice things about me. Now, I wrote a poem to illustrate the pleasure it gives me to rhyme and how unfashionable that is. I wrote a poem called You Weren't Serious. And here it is. You weren't serious. You weren't serious when you said you loved me as roses love a light rain in another country when the pain had gone that held me in good stead. Then I knew it was either God or death before a firing squad. You weren't serious when you said I'd never grow old, and if I did, I'd be as lucky as a reckless kid who runs away from home to feed his head. When death comes and leaves his calling card, the kid's playing catch in his friend's backyard. You lied, but I believed you when you said I'd succeed as a failure, a writer who lives from hand to mouth, a fighter who gets knocked down but gets back up, ahead on points, so he wins the match, and the company gives him a silver watch. Were you serious when you said I'd fall in love again, win her heart, get rich quick, and suspect all along it was a trick? So it happened. I had a new reason to get out of bed and walk along the streets that I know well and learn my lines before I rang her doorbell.
You know, what you do, even with form, makes it sound like you're just sitting at my kitchen table. And that is the contribution you've made to American poetry. You've taken the biggest ideas and you've put them into backyards, bathtubs, into the most colloquial and vernacular things among us. So what you did was take it from its Georgian, Victorian, stuffy stuff, and you really made it colloquial. I attribute the change in tone to you because you didn't care. you had a PhD. I mean, you knew the ropes, but you told us to say our own voice and to be who we were. And that is your contribution, David.
Well, I believe that. Just yesterday, I was having lunch with a good friend of mine, and she said she thinks she's too sensitive and that she should be tougher. And I said, no, don't be tougher. Be sensitive. Be yourself. That's why we love you. And um, no, I agree. I think that that's the way to be.
Oh, man.
But poetry has so much to offer us. When I was a lad of 17, 16, 17, my goals were I wanted to go to an Ivy League university, preferably Columbia. I wanted to get a real education in literature, philosophy, music, art. Uh, I wanted to write poetry. But I felt that the role of a poet, since poetry itself cannot pay your rent, the role of the poet entails editing, writing prose, and all the writing you do enhances all the other writing you do. So from the time I was in college, not only did I write for the Columbia Review, I became the editor. Paul Auster, the late Paul Auster was one of my writers, one of our writers. So we became friends 55 years ago. Uh, and I wrote for the Columbia Spectator. And then when I went to Cambridge, England, I wrote for the newspaper, the weekly paper there. And I reviewed books for Poetry Magazine and for Newsday. And I got a PhD.
I'm going to take you right back to that. So we're going to hark back to all that from your beginnings. So in the 60s, you got your PhD from Columbia and you started writing. You actually started winning poetry prizes in the 60s. And then you taught at Brooklyn College. I know later you ended up at the New School in New York, but you quit teaching in academia to become a freelance writer. And I know you wrote for you wrote the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the Boston Globe, all the big ones. Okay. So you took a risk of your 9 to 5 job with tenure or with a stable salary to become a freelance writer. But I'm interested in knowing what you took from academia to apply to journalism, which made you so successful.
Well, first of all, I did receive my PhD in 1978. I was teaching at the time at Hamilton College. I had a 4-year appointment. It was wonderful because it was exactly 10 years after my 4 years as an undergraduate at Columbia. So it was like doing the college again, only in a bucolic setting as a teacher instead of in a metropolitan setting as a youth. And I finished that and I got a postdoctoral fellowship at Cornell thanks to A.R. Ammons. Archie Ammons was a friend of
Love
mine.
him. Loved him.
Yeah, it was a great guy. But that's what I mean about a gamble. I was at Cornell with this postdoctoral fellowship, and the graduate students were a very unhappy lot. There was a lot of competition among them, and the job market was tight. And I thought some of the professors were really weird, and I really did not like the embrace of critical theory, deconstruction, all this stuff. And I like the books. I like the real poetry, the real prose, and not some theory that you apply to everything. And I got offered jobs that I didn't like. And I did make this gamble because I'd heard from a pal in New York that Newsweek was down one book reviewer, and I got them to. I got Charlie Michener, who was the senior editor there, to read my portfolio, and I got a few assignments, and then I started reviewing regularly for Newsweek.
Right.
I did that for 7 years, and but I had the kind of relationship that allowed me to write for other magazines. I mean, there were disadvantages to the relationship, but it meant that I could write for the New York Times Magazine and Book
Mhm.
Review, the Washington Post, the Globe, LA Times, Newsday, Philadelphia Inquirer.
But that was living hand to mouth. It was
That's
indeed, but it really set you up to be the the progenitor of American contributions to criticism, because you've written on art, you've written on poetry, you've written on Jewish history. So I believe that all of that just fed into the great river that you couldn't really control, but was controlling you. You were just on your way to this career that was deepening and broadening, that we've watched for since the mid 20th century when you entered it. One of your favorite nonfiction books and mine is Frank Sinatra. Now, you have written about lyricism. I have read what you have written about lyrics, that you feel that lyricism in the mid 20th century was so passionate and so authentic and so beautiful. But then when you get to Sinatra, what hooked you on him as a singer? What got you about Sinatra? I know that you're um, very knowledgeable about music, but why Sinatra?
well, that was the first singer, the first voice, the first name. Uh, when I was 8 years old at a summer colony, a little girl and I uh, sang "Love and Marriage" together in the in the end of summer show. And that was a hit of his, of course. And then a few years later, I heard my older sister had a radio, and among all the rock and roll songs, there was Witchcraft and
Mm,
All the Way. And then he sang High Hopes, and Kennedy
mm.
had that Sammy Kahn adapted High Hopes to the Kennedy run for the presidency. We've got to back Jack. We've got to back Jack. Jack is da-dum ba-dum on the right track. Da-dee ba-dum ba-da-dum, and Sinatra sang it. And then I got a record and I heard him sing "I've Got You Under My Skin." And I
Mm.
thought, this is I like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, but I was hooked by this guy. Nancy with the laughing face,
Mm.
and I get along without you very well. And all of his songs, I mean, he was really an artist. He's also a very complicated and
Yeah.
interesting human being.
And that's what you wrote about. In fact, the title is Sinatra's Century, 100 Notes on the Man and His World.
Well, here's a guy who, at the age of 22, uh, has this incredible voice. I mean, this is just, and it's a decade of tremendous voices, boys and girls, men and women. Some of the most wonderful singers of all time. So if I exalt this one, that doesn't mean that I don't care for Bing Crosby or
Mm-hmm.
Dick Haymes or Lee Wiley or Helen Forrest or Joe Stafford or the great Doris Day. I love them all. In fact, Doris is my favorite female singer.
Hmm.
Um, Ella and Doris. Um,
Their Ella's cadence and tone and timing is likened to Frank Sinatra's. That's what the jazz
Yes,
scholars
well,
say.
well, he thought she was the best. I mean, she is the best. And in fact, Doris Day learned how to sing because she was in an auto crash. She'd been a dancer, and she's like, I don't know, 15 years old, and she can't go anywhere. So she plays the radio and she hears Ella Fitzgerald,
Mm.
and that's who she patterned herself after. And Ella really is the greatest female jazz singer. So they do duets. Sinatra is really an interesting guy. He will do a duet with anyone. I mean,
Hmm.
he's
Mhm.
fearless. He'll sing with the great opera star of the Met. And he will sing with Crosby in High Society. They had this great song. Well, did you ever? What a swell party this is. And it's one of the
Wait a minute,
great
we have a
duets.
first. We have a first. I don't think anyone has an interview with David singing Sinatra. That he's written about him. He's this critic and biographer, but I think for the first time we've ever gotten you singing off note Sinatra. When you got into his life, how did you do the research?
Well, I read lots and lots and lots of books because this is not virgin territory. There's a lot written about Frank,
Mhm.
and I got to play all of his music, alternate tracks. There's a station on satellite radio called Sinatra,
Mhm.
Seriously Sinatra. So,
It's the soundtrack for my life. I'll tell you that it is a
well,
soundtrack.
it's so I spent a lot of time writing. Uh, I had to figure out a way to organize a book.
Yes.
That's always important. It's like the form precedes the content in a certain way.
Hmm.
And once I came up with the idea of 100 notes, because he was going to be 100 years old, and because it was his century in several senses, and that means that in World War II, he visits Roosevelt in the White House, and he visits the Pope, and then he gets involved with Ava Gardner, and at the same time, he's beloved by the mafioso, the mafia. And then his career crashes, but he makes this tremendous comeback. And then he becomes, they call him the chairman of the board, and then he gets involved with the Rat Pack and Kennedy, whom he sort of
True.
pimps for, and
Mhm.
Marilyn Monroe. And I mean, this is a life full, and his son is kidnapped right after Kennedy's assassinated. This is a very interesting life. Uh, and he's really, the personality is so extraordinary.
People
He's
need to
very
get that
willful.
book. It is still available. They need to get Sinatra's Century, 100 Notes on the Man and His World. The New York Times wrote a very nice comment about it, really an extraordinary complimentary remark about it. But people are going to get mad at me if I don't hear a couple more poems from you. So
Uh,
let's have a station break, which is called Poetry. David Lehman, who is America's curator.
well, I can read a poem called Sudden Glory, in which Frank figures.
Hmm.
Is this a good idea?
It's always a good idea.
Sudden glory is what Thomas Hobbes, the philosopher, attributed laughter to. You know, you talked about what made me a cultural critic. I absorbed all this knowledge, but the thing I learned was how to write. The academics don't write well. They write. What is it? The scholarly magazines are written by people who can't write for people who won't read. So I learned how to write prose. When you write for Newsweek and you have a weekly deadline, you may not like your colleagues, uh, just as an academe, but in academe where they fight to the death, you're at a magazine, you have a deadline, you got to work with the other people, the people in the morgue, the research assistant you have, your fact checker, your proofreader, your boss, his boss. I mean, it's
Did you get
anyway.
paid by the line?
Well, it depends
You
for
had a
whom you're writing.
byline, so you must have been, since you had your own name, I think you probably got a salary, but it's still a very close life to live. But let's get a poem, a poem, a poem.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very close life to live. And the money is another thing. Sudden glory. Why did I laugh tonight? Was it because Hobbes was right? Laughter is the sudden glory of superiority. So I laughed at the guy who said Sinatra must have smirked his way through love and marriage. Totally wrong. He meant every word of it, as well as High Hopes, The House I Live In, and America the Beautiful. You don't know shit about Frank Sinatra. And why does it give me so much pleasure that Stanley Fish, who knows so much more about Milton than I, thinks Sinatra's voice was not as good as Crosby's. Totally wrong. Another jolt of sudden glory.
What a great line. That's a great last line. So you have written so much criticism. I'm curious about, well, you entered the world, you were born in 48. So when you were 20, you were already on top of the poetry world. And so you've watched the whole century really unfold, certainly from mid 20th century. I know you've written about deconstructivism and avant-garde poetry. Where is poetry now, do you think?
Well, the thing I'm not happy about with a lot of poetry is that there's a lot of identity poetics going on and a subordination of poetry and art to politics, which I think is very damaging to poetry because the poem isn't going to change anyone's mind politically, but the politics will overwhelm the poetry. So there's the bad part. On the other hand, we have poets who are not all recognized to the extent that they should be, which is one of the reasons I am an editor, to promote those voices. We have a man, Terrence Winch, who runs for our Best American Poetry blog, Pick of the Week every Sunday. Now, there's the fellow, outstanding editorial acumen.
Mm.
He's a terrific poet. He's very witty, and wit I find in Terrence, I find in Elaine Equi is a poet. Amy Gerstler is another poet I think was a great wit. Their poems make you give you joy as well as passion or information.
I'm smiling because I just wrote Terrence a notice about something, and I said, well, don't blame me for wanting an audience. And he wrote back and said, well, who should we blame? So that is Terrence. We can tell everyone to look on Sundays for Best American Poetry online. And another thing Terrence does is create a visual that I cannot believe. I say, where do you find them, Terrence? He says, well, Google helps. But that monthly outcropping of your print edition is really something I wake up for every Sunday. Your Best American Poetry, though, you started it about 40 years ago?
In 1987, I had the idea, and the first volume came out in 1988, edited by John Ashbery. And so we've had, I think, 37, 38, if you count next year's. You see, the 2023 book is just out,
Oh,
and I'm working on the 2024 book will be out in September, and we're working on 2025. The deadline is rolling, it never stops. It's like having a conveyor belt. It's like being like getting your wish when you were little. And my wish was, when I went to the New York Public Library, that I would get books
oh.
like on a conveyor belt. And that's exactly what happened in life. Only the conveyor belt was called UPS. And that's what happened to me. But I felt that I had one real gift, which was I could write about complicated things or
Hmm.
artistic things or things that are important in a way that the serious person can understand.
You got that right. You nailed that one. Put it right on your tombstone. Okay. One more poem before we go on.
Let's do it.
David Lehman is here and I'm in heaven.
Okay, I have a poem from another book of daily poems. It's called The Evening Sun. And I like this one. I was just rereading it today, and this came out in 2002. It was a long time ago. This was the poems have dates instead of titles. November 15.
Hmm.
Like Sinatra, the day his voice cracked on stage is how I feel today, as if I had punched a stooge. At 19 minutes before 5, there's no hope. For modernism, nothing can stop the hype. No reason for the sheep in the dining room. where the diner's unable to leave, days pass, the cream rises to the top. You make me want to be bad. Come on, forget your troubles, be happy in bed. With me, there's a new magazine on the net called Failure. I tried to access it today, but could not. Aha, I got the zen of the experience. And you say a Hail Mary, and the Prime Minister of Japan is named Memento Mori. The subway map is an embryo with a green heart. Some call it poetry, but I know how much it hurt. Now that poem is
Know
all
that poem.
slant rhymes.
I know that poem because that was you were so incorrigible. Where was that published?
No, I can't remember.
I remember
I was
reading it.
I just like, the rhymes are stage, stooge, hope, pipe, room, cream, bad,
Mm.
bed, net, not, Mary, Maury, heart, hurt. And if you write a poem every day, you can try out all of these antics, or and see, you could throw out, you're writing one a day, you've got a whole hill of
Do you
poems.
still do
Here's
it? Do you still
Oh,
try?
well,
Do you write a little
uh
something every day, even a line
yes,
or an
I
email?
write every day.
I do too.
I write every day.
I know. Oh, when you mentioned David Lehman as a little kid in the library, I just want to know what he was like. I mean, you are the circus master. Okay. You've conducted exhibits all over the country. You've been a quiz master. You've been a host on media. You've done, I think, everything. What was the little 5-year-old like? What must he been like? Tell us.
I'd like to know myself.
No,
I wonder how you know all this about me, but I am actually a very shy, self-conscious, introspective person. Nobody believes it, but it's true.
But was the little boy shy? The little 5-year-old?
Well, in some ways, he was fearless,
Mm-hmm. I believe
but
that.
to overcome to overcome the reticence, whatever it is that holds you back, I became, I maybe overcompensated, but I love lecturing.
Mm-hmm.
You give me 100 people, even if they don't speak English, and I can entertain them for an hour.
But you know why, David? Because you make it about them. And
That's
I
right.
watched you from a distance. You forget who you are, you forget ego, and you make it about them. And it gets much easier that way.
That's right. That's how you teach
That's how
too.
you do
Uh,
it. But
well,
I can see as a little boy, I bet you organized everybody in the neighborhood in pods. I mean, you will play with the firemen today and you will play cavalry today. And then we're going to all make a song. Now, I know that's the way you were.
well, yes, there's something to that. I did like that uh, element, and I like being a leader in that way. And it turned out I was a pretty good organizer.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and But I learned I guess, how to read the audience
Hmm.
and connect with them, make eye contact, metaphorically as well as literally, and also have jokes, jest, and not take yourself so seriously that you can't laugh at yourself. Well, when I started teaching, I thought you had to master the material, which I did. But as I grew older, after 20 years of being outside of academia, and academia changed entirely. It was grade inflation and all sorts of things. But I realized that the real purpose, the real job is to coordinate a group of 12 to 15 students into a cohesive whole in which people can feel free to say whatever without fear of ridicule, without fear of humiliation, and with a certain amount of praise. And if
Mm.
you could figure out this person has a strength, that person is not very good in 10 out of 11 things, but what that person can do is memorize a soliloquy from Hamlet. And
Mm.
if that's all that person does, and you give that person kudos, you're not going to lose her, you know.
You're still the teacher. I can hear that. I still hear the teacher in you. I'm going to challenge you to begin a podcast. And we have a lot of things that we need to hear that people have forgotten. So you've got the microphone, you've got the suspenders, you got it going on. So I think you should start a monthly podcast, David Lehman Says, and then just tell us things, tell us stuff. The world is falling apart, David. And there's so much division, as we know. Poetry is holding it together so tenderly, so gently. And the past has to be remembered in the way that only you can do it. So are you going to do this or not? You can tell us later. Another poem, and then we will get more into David Lehman,
That's very,
who is
very, very charming.
America's. Oh, it's a great idea. America's
Yes.
curious.
If somebody offers it to me, I'll think it
You have to
over.
do it on your own. No one, that everything you did, no one asked you for. Everything you did, you imagined and initiated. Nobody said, will you
That's
please?
true.
So this is one more thing. It's your time. You have the history of the 20th century in you. And the idea of Jewish history, Jewish music. Every podcast can be a different theme. Okay, on with poetry. This is David Lehman. This is the poet
You're
in the poem.
you're terrific,
I'll talk to you
Grace.
more about it later.
Okay, you're terrific. All right, this is a poem in the evening sun, November 22. The trick here is 2 words per line as a
Oh,
formal restraint. Try it sometime. Poetry is posing a question to the universe and getting no for an answer.
mm,
We're getting no answer. I'm not sure which.
amazing. And what it says is a lot. I'm going to give that prompt to my students next week. See
Oh,
what,
it's even better with three words per line is a lot easier than
yeah.
two. Um, but I did pick something here. Oh, well, yeah, you want to hear a sonnet? Uh, kind of a sonnet. It's called Room Key. I find you here, my lord Ares, god of strife, in the soiled sheets of temporary lovers
Oh,
who
dear.
merged in the dark and blew their covers, the anonymous husband, the disappointed wife. Here they lie, their bones exposed, vanity obeyed, vows unmade, lust opposed by fear with lust the winner, the tongue tasting the nectar, melting the will, nostalgia for the mud in her nostrils flaring, the rush of blood stiffening his resolve. And look at what they have to lose, and yet they cannot quit. So strong is love, the blind almighty boy, son of beauty, who took the war to Troy.
Whoa. I have never in my life and all the reading I've done heard soiled sheets of temporary lovers. Didn't you edit a book on eroticism?
Did
That's right. And
the best American erotic poems
right,
from
right.
Francis Scott Key to the present. Yes, that is one development in the 35 years or so of best American poetry is that there were many more women writing uh, at a high level. And there are also many more African American poets writing at a high level and other groups. And sex. They write with a frankness about erotics. And sometimes it's too much information, but a lot of times it's very moving. And I think eroticism is, a challenge for a writer and a good one.
To make it good poetry. But in my day, in the 50s, when I started writing, you did not say that, because when I was writing for the stage, I was told you only speak in the bedroom the way you speak in the living room. I mean, there women, and we pushed against that, but you're quite right. I still think that women are timid in writing. I don't think they have the courage that men have in talking about body parts. A few, but I still think it's the man's ballywick. The body is still, we just, I think the women still are a little shy about it.
Some,
At
but
least
then
the ones
there's
that I know, the 90-year-olds that I know.
but there's always Sharon Olds.
Oh,
Uh,
she's the forerunner. Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure.
there's always Molly Peacock, who
It
wrote about
again.
her body in very interesting ways. She even wrote a poem. Have you ever faked an orgasm?
Oh,
Is
that's
the
right.
title of a poem of hers. Uh, no, I think people have a certain boldness. On the other hand, there's a corruption of discourse. And you turn on the cable television station or HBO or something, and the F word is punctuates every sentence. So it is deprived of its force of meaning.
Mhm.
That's too bad. That's why I use swear words so few,
You don't
so
need them. You don't need them. Yeah.
there, I'm sure I overuse them at some point in my
Well,
poetry.
let's have another poem and we'll see if it
Okay.
squeezes in or not.
Do you have a specific
Well, I
request?
think we're launching the new book. So something from the morning line.
The Morning Line. Well, this is a poem called It Could Happen to You, which is the name of a wonderful song by Jimmy Van Heusen and Johnny Burke. And everyone has covered this song. It Could Happen to You. It's June 15, 2017, a Thursday, 40th anniversary of the infamous day the Mets traded Tom Seaver to Cincinnati, and they're still losing. I mean, we are 7-1 to the Washington Nationals, a team that didn't exist in 1977, the summer of a little tour in France with Henry James in the yellow Renault 12. The light, a lovely gray, the rain, a violin concerto, Prokofiev's number 2 in D major, and I had books to read: Huxley, Woolf, Forster, and their enemy, F.R. Leavis. Empson, a little dull for my taste. Also, Freud on errors, Norman Mailer on orgasms, James Baldwin in Paris, Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, Part 1. And John Ashbery tells me he is reading The Possessed, translated as The Demons in the newfangled translation, while Ron and I stay faithful to Constance Garnett. I went upstairs, stood on the terrace, ate some cherries, admired the outline of trees in the dark, and Rosemary Clooney sang It Could Happen to You.
Hmm.
And I was a healthy human being,
Hmm.
not a sick man, for the first summer in 3 years.
Whoa, what a testament. Before we go into that, I just want to give a shout out for Nin Andrews, because I do not want to forget to say her Book of Orgasms. I don't want
Oh,
to,
Lynn was my student at Hamilton College.
well, she rocks the world. But back to you. She rocks
She's
the
a
world.
brilliant poet, a wonderful poet,
Fabulous.
funny. The Book of Orgasms, I was there when she was working on it back in the early 90s. She's been a friend of mine. She was a student of mine, and we're friends. She's a wonderful gal.
I love her to death. I love her to death. But when you talk about these lyrics so lovingly, you have spoken widely about the lyrics in American poetry. So tell us what you believe that those songs said to us. How did they do it? What do you see in it?
Well, first of all, I think the lyricists are actually greater than the poets in many ways. Their task is very hard. If you go over Ira Gershwin's lyrics, or Johnny Mercer's, or Lawrence Hart's, or Oscar Hammerstein's, I mean, they uh they're very beautiful. Oscar Hammerstein was once, Rodgers and Hammerstein, they were the kings, and now he's undervalued. And but he has a song that begins, "I'm as restless as a willow in a windstorm. I'm as jumpy as a puppet on a
On a
string.
string.
I," and then
This.
and he has all these wonderful similes. I'm as busy as a spider spinning daydreams. I'm
Mm.
as giddy as a baby on a swing. I haven't seen a crocus or a rosebud or a robin on the wing, but I feel so gay in a melancholy way that it might as well be spring. Oh, it might as well be spring.
Oh,
Now, there's a song that there are very few songs that I prefer someone else's rendition to Sinatra's. Dick Hames has that one nailed. Stephen Sondheim said to Oscar, Oscar Hammerstein was Stephen Sondheim's mentor. And Sondheim, when he was young, very, young, when he was Stevie, uh, he said to Hammerstein, he said, what is, oh, what a beautiful morning. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. And Hammerstein said, oh, I think it means quite a lot. And it does. I mean, sometimes I meet people. Frank Lesser wrote a song called On a Slow Boat to China. I'd like to get you on a slow boat to China. And people say to me, oh, that's not a very interesting work. And I think you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, or Irving Berlin, has, and you'll find that you're in the Roto Reviewer. Oh,
wow.
I could write a sonnet
Oh,
about her Easter bonnet. That this is full of meaning. It's not the meaning of Plato's cave, but that's what you go to Plato for. But it's full of meaning. These lyrics. And then they're the ones of tremendous wit. Venus de Milo was noted for her charms, but strictly between us, you're cuter than Venus. And what's more, you've got arms.
there's your first podcast. Number one, David on lyrics. That's number one. I'll give you the titles and then it's up to you. You've got the microphone. But you have all these books in poetry and art and culture and history, and they line the walls. You have more awards than you can even name. And did you do
Not
everything?
enough.
Oh,
No,
of course.
not
And
enough. Okay.
Howard Nemerov said, bring them on, bring them on. But did you do everything you wanted to do?
No, I would have liked to be. Well, I did some acting off Broadway, um, and also in summer camp, and I would have liked to do more of that. I would like to have taken voice lessons earlier so I could really sing instead of, I mean, people think it's charming when I give a lecture and punctuate it with, singing a few bars just to remind them of what, the song. But I wish I had, done that more seriously. I wish I had, oh, there's so many things you
But what do
want
you
to.
bless when you look at your life? What do you bless?
Well, I went to Columbia when it was a great place until I got there, and uh, um, that was fantastic
Yeah,
education.
yeah.
Fantastic. I went to England. I spent 2 summers at Oxford and 2 years at Cambridge and a lot of time in Paris. And those are really wonderful things. And a whole summer in the Riviera near Nice in Vence. And
And you've lived the life, David. Let's admit it. You have lived the life, but you're still going strong. And now I think media is the next chapter because it's just a way of getting words from one place to another, and we can't have you just sit there in your office with everything that you know about American culture. So I would like to say that We will do everything we can to let David Lehman's work be known. And now we need a final poem.
Well, do I have a final poem?
Not
This
for
is
our lives, just for this podcast.
I understand. A toast. When the doctor breaks the news, will you cry or sing the blues? No way. I'll raise my glass, take a sip, get off my ass, and bounce my red rubber ball against the rubble of the ghetto wall and catch it, feeling good, catching it as a center fielder would, while the skirt walks by, hoping I'll notice, and 5 decades pass as swiftly as a kiss.
That is the voice of poet David Lehman, America's cultural critic. And this is the Poet and the Poem from the Library of Congress. The program is Forest Woods Media's The Poet and the Poem. Post-production by Mike Turpin, MET Studios. We wish to thank the Library of Congress for making the program possible. Funding is provided by the Rivada Foundation, Sinipit Fund, and the Anne Arundel Council for the Arts, and friends of the program, Natalie Canavore, Sandy Jackson Cohen, and Avi Day Shoshani. Mike Turpin's our engineer, and I'm Grace Cavalieri.